Okay. A good evening, good night of Shabbos. Welcome to the Torah of Geography. And a reminder that our learning is the Ilui Nishmas Hakadosh Hirsch Ben Yonasan Shimshon Uperochana in loving memory of Hirsch Goldberg Poland, who was killed at Kiddush Hashem after almost a year in captivity in Gaza by the terrorists who were holding him. That Hirsch was someone who throughout his life had a great love for maps and atlases and travel. And by studying Torah, particularly through the lens of geography, we hope to keep his memory alive in this world as his neshama shines in the next. And again, if any of the Divrei Torah that we share tonight is something that you feel that you want to share with people around you over the course of Shabbos or otherwise, so please mention Hirsch's name in connection to this Torah. The end of Parashat Vayishlach, in many ways, is one of the more baffling sections of the Torah. The Torah goes in great detail to describing the genealogy and the line of kings that descend from Esav. Information that ostensibly does nothing, right, to further our love of God, our fear of God, our deeper understanding of Torah, right? Ancient, obscure facts of history which really raises the question why the Torah devotes so much bandwidth to something that seems like it is fundamentally trivial from our perspective. So I'd like to show you tonight is that embedded within that section of the kings of Edom is information that perhaps brings to light, together with a little bit of look at the map, a section of all places of the book of Iyov. So the book of Iyov, a book from Ksuvim, is in its own way one of the most famous books in Tanakh, in that it deals with a fundamental theological issue, right? The question of tzaddik v'ra. Right? So again, the basic story of Sefer Iyov is that Sefer Iyov is the narrative of a man who the Torah tells us is a righteous person, right? Is a tzaddik, right, who inexplicably is cursed with a number of terrible kinds of suffering, right? And the idea, most of the book of Iyov is dialogue between Iyov and a series of friends, right, who try to understand that basic theological question of tzaddik v'ralo, right, of the righteous who suffer, right, the problem of suffering, the problem of pain, of theodicy, which is from deepest antiquity one of the fundamental religious questions. So there is a timelessness to Iyov in that it addresses a question that really is perennial, right, in the human condition and in our attempt to understand how this world goes together with a all good, all powerful God. In the end, right, HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself comes to Iyov and basically says to him that mortals do not necessarily have the capacity to understand from the perspective of God. So the placement of the story of Iyov, right, when it takes place historically, geographically, is unclear. There's a Gemara Mavasra that goes through a series of opinions that tries to make the arguments of Iyov living at various times in human history, all of which perhaps is there to remind us that there is a timelessness to Iyov that transcends different historical moments, right? That throughout the generations, people have contended with this problem, and one can make an argument that Iyov takes place in a variety of different times, or even according to one opinion in the Midrash, in the Gemara there, that the whole book is perhaps a parable, right? However, the story of Iyov sets a framework at the very beginning that is somewhat mysterious. The Iyov begins, Ishaya be'eretz Utz, there was a man in the land of Utz, Ushmo Iyov, right? Iyov Shmo, his name was Iyov. And he was a perfect, wholehearted, just person who feared God and stayed away from evil. So the book begins by situating Iyov in this place called Eretz in Eretz Utz. Now, the problem is, on the surface, we don't know where Eretz Utz is. So where does this book transpire? So the Ibn Ezra begins and says, the first thing Ibn Ezra gives is that Eov is a descendant of Nachor, the brother of Abraham. So according to this approach, right, that Nachor, right, who is Abraham's brother, the Torah tells us about the descendant that Utz Bechoro, that's Buzachiv, right, that there was a descendant, right, whose name was Utz. So some of the Mepharshim follow this approach, and that would say, and we'll go down to the map here. Right here is map. We'll make it a little bit smaller so we can get more stuff on the screen. Right. One opinion is that Utz is somewhere in the land of Aram. Right. In other words, what is today or was today Syria. Right. And that's where the story takes place. Right. And Utz would be connected to Utz, the descendant of Nachor. However, the Ibn Ezra does not end with this suggestion. He says, he says that Eov is a descendant of Esav. Why? He says, Inyan Eretz Utz. He says that if we want to understand what is this land of Utz, we have a pasuk, right? In the book of Eicha, right? The laments over the destruction of Yerushalayim. It says, Sisi v'simchi bas Adam hayosheves be'eretz Utz. Right? Rejoice and be glad, daughter of Adam, who dwells in the land of Utz. Right? So the Ibn Ezra says we actually have a reference in Tanakh to Eretz Utz. Eretz Utz is where, quote unquote, the daughter of Edom, in other words, the nation of Edom, the descendants of Esav live. Right? So according to the Ibn Ezra, where does Eov take place? Eov takes place in Malchus Edom, in the kingdom of Edom, right? The area Har Seir, right? The mountain which in the time of the Torah is so prominent is somewhere around here, right? This is the setting of Sefer Eov according to the Ibn Ezra, right? Eretz Utz is where Edom lives according to Eicha. Ergo, Eov must be a descendant of Esav. Now, this is quite fascinating, right? Eov is certainly, we say at the beginning of the Sefer, Eov is a tzaddik, right? He's a righteous person. And it is fascinating, right, that according to the Ibn Ezra, the classic text, right, of the problem of tzaddik v'ralo is set, right, in the land of Edom of all places, right? So whenever we talk about Esav and Edom, we bring a lot of baggage into it, and certainly there was a lot of negative history, right? This pasuk that we just quoted in Eicha is basically says that the nation of Edom, right, were kind of bystanders and collaborators, participants with the Babylonians in the destruction of the first temple, right? And Yirmiyah Navi says, be happy now, but you're going to get punished eventually, right? You are not going to escape unscathed because of the role you played in the destruction of Yerushalayim, right? Your day is coming. Now, what's interesting is that both the Ramban and the Sforno also adopt this idea. And in fact, it's a long Ramban. We won't go through the whole thing. The Ramban, in the very beginning of Eov, makes the case that there are many other reasons, right, to say that Eov is from Edom, right? He goes through the names. Eov has a number of friends, right, who, as I said before, dialogue with him to try to understand his theological setting. One of them, his name is Eliphaz. Who is Eliphaz? Eliphaz is the name of Esav's firstborn. So he says, this must be a descendant of Esav. He has an Esav name. And he tries to make the case that the other names in the book, Sofar and Bildad, he goes to the whole thing, that we can find the roots of many of these names, the name Teman, the name Eliphaz, they're all there at the end of Parshas Vayishlach, right? The idea that that all of them are from this kind of Esavian background. Now, here's the fascinating part, right? And the notion that both the Ramban and the Sforno develop, right, is that being from Edom is actually, ironically, part of his righteousness. Why? He says, Avraham, Edom. This man, Eov, the Ramban posits, he's a descendant of Avraham Avinu, right? V'kiras baro, va'avadoso b'mitzvos hasichlios, and all of the mitzvos that are logically derived, he kept, right, in an upright kind of way. Right? He stayed away from evil. He says that this was him, v'chein chaver and his friends. All of them have this heritage that come from Esav, right? So we're used to thinking of Esav as a Russia. But here, right, the Ramban and the Sforno both say that within the family of Esav was preserved traditions from Avram Avinu. And again, we'll go back to the end of the Ramban. Ela hanashim Iyov v'chaverav. Hey mizera ha'ish shayashorish ha'emunah, that they are also of the seed of the man who is the root of faith, ozim zarko, right, who hold on to his ways, as Hashem said about Avram, ki dativ lemana asher yitzavez banav vezbeso acharav, that Avram was told that God's relationship with him was because Avram was to pass this along to his descendants. Now, normally, we think of his descendants as meaning Klal Yisrael, right? Meaning the Jewish people. But here, a number of Rishonim say that to properly understand Eov, right, set after all in the land of Edom, is to suggest that perhaps within Edom, right, within the descendants of Esav, I don't know if everyone, but that there was a live Masorah from Avinu, right, to continue, right? The Eov is a faithful descendant, right, of Avram, even though he is not Jewish in this reading of the story. Now, if this is correct, right, this approach, right, changes perhaps part of our reading of the end of the parsha, right? That instead of that we are reading an account of a civilization that is doomed, right, that is steeped in wickedness, the Ramban this Werner opens to the notion that this was actually an Abrahamic civilization in the positive sense of it, right? It produces not just Eov in isolation, but Eov and his whole group of friends, right, are all an Abrahamic group within the context of Eretz Utz, right, within the land of Esav, right, pointing us to a more redeemable quality. Now, there's an interesting Netziv, right? This is a Netziv actually in Vizos HaBracha, and the Netziv says, right, at the beginning of Vizos HaBracha, the Torah says, Hashem miSinai ba, right? God came from Sinai, V'zarach me Seir Lamo, and he's shown from Seir, right? Seir is the mountain of Edom. From there, God shined his nation. It's a poetic pasuk, not a very easy pasuk, and this is how the Netziv understands it. He says what Moshe is saying there is that at the time of Matan Torah, right, various merits were given to the Jewish people. So he says something very interesting. He says, Koach avoda ya biyad umas ha'olam v'chasidei mishas priyas shemayim va'aretz. He said, really, the service, the whole notion of serving and worshiping God is was given over to the righteous of humanity from the time of creation. And he said, specifically, very interesting, right, that this is actually a gift, right, that was given specifically, which human beings were which human societies were the worshipful of God. He says it was the people of Seir, that this was a gift, Yitzchak Aviem. This was an inheritance they had from Yitzchak, Shkemosh Nisbar b'Sefer Bereshis, as explained in Sefer Bereshis. Al Isha shenivchar Yisrael b'Sinai zorich miSeir, right? Schuso hayofa, Koko hayofa shel Seir Lomo Hainu Yisrael, right? That what the pasuk means is that when the Jewish people were chosen on Mount Sinai, right, part of the act of chosenness is that this power of a connection and a worship of God, which was actually cultivated according to the Netziv by Esav's descendants, right? At the time of Ma'amad Har Sinai is given over to the Jewish people. So if we take all of this as a kaleidoscope, what we are seeing is that this account of the end of Sparas Vayishlach, of the descendants and the kings of Esav, right, may have a lot more to it. The idea that even before, and maybe especially before the Jews leave Mitzrayim, right, that part of the traditions of Avraham Avinu are faithfully transmitted within the world of Esav, right? That there is a something positive and holy residing within the world of Esav, according to these Rishonim and Achronim, right? And that becomes the setting for this classic work of Jewish thought, right? And really of human religious thought, that it resides and has a role to play within the world of all things, within the world of Esav. Last thing, which is just interesting, we know from Chumash itself much about the Avodah Zarah of the surrounding nations, right? We know that Dagon is the deity of the Plishtim, right? We know that Chemosh is the god of the Moavim, right? And Milcom is the god of the Ammonim, right? And certainly the whole world of Baal and Ashtoreth and all the gods of the Canaanim. It's interesting that we don't have any reference to a idolatrous god worshipped by the Edomim, right? Which raises the possibility. Certainly, again, Edom did not get along with the Jewish people. There's much bad blood that existed, right? But the question is, perhaps that again, as intimated by these sources, is more supporting evidence, right? That much more of the traditions of Avram and Yitzchak were preserved in the world of Esav than we might think otherwise. A good Shabbos to all.